Tony Dungy. Coach Dungy, thank you so much for being with us. We hope that you are well and that your family is well. I want to get your reaction to Drew Brees' initial comments and then the apology that he's now released. What do you think about all of it?
Well, I was disappointed in the initial comments for sure. This is a time when we need unifying voices, not divisive voices. But I believe in the Bible, and I believe as a Christian that you accept apologies. And the Bible says a tree is known by its fruit. And that's what we have to look for with Drew. I've known him 20 years. I consider him a friend. I've seen good fruit in his life. I believe we'll see good fruit from here on out. So I'm going to accept his apology and move forward and see if this can be a moment that brings us together rather than driving a wedge to take us apart.
I completely agree with you, Coach, and I think that Drew Brees has represented the NFL and the sports community in exemplary fashion for many, many years, which is why I was so shocked to see what I saw from him. The tone deafness is not something you would ever associate with Drew Brees, so I was shocked by that. With that being said, I do believe it's a win for communications because the bottom line is by him saying what he said, you can imagine folks out there who happen to be white and have been incredibly tone deaf, and this crystallizes and illuminates that even further. I think because of it, it can work to the benefit of black people, particularly at this moment in time where we've got young soldiers out on the street protesting and fighting for rights, for all our rights to be acknowledged and for us to be treated like the civilized human beings we are. What are your thoughts about that?
I believe you're absolutely right. This could be a watershed moment. And we've seen a couple of these. Vic Fangio said the other day he didn't believe there was racism in the NFL. And he had to think about that statement and come back on it. And so I think we've got to be okay with that. I've said many times, communication, listening is important. So we've got to be able to listen to these kind of statements, have people have the freedom to say it, but then be able to come back in love and say, you know what, Drew, that wasn't the right thing to say, and here's why. Yes, your grandfathers fought. So did mine, and my dad fought. So that flag means something to us as well. But this is a different matter. This was never about the flag. This is about treatment of people. And I think you get that message across with communication.
Coach, Drew Brees, said virtually the same thing 4 years ago when Kaepernick originally knelt. There was video of police brutality that was widely circulated online and on social media at that time. And when he said it then, it was uncontroversial and, in fact, reflected the mainstream point of view. And now it's so controversial that within 24 hours he has to apologize profusely and promise that he'll educate himself and do more listening and less talking. What do you think has changed?
Well, Max, I think at that time, 4 years ago, the discussion was on the flag and it was on the national anthem. And now we've come to understand that that never was the narrative. The narrative was directed that way, but we understand better what this is all about. So now when you come out and say that, it is different because people understand that this whole movement, peaceful protest, was about making some positive changes in our society. It wasn't about disrespecting the flag.
To piggyback off of what Max was alluding to, and we've all said that on this show, it wasn't about the flag. That's not what Colin Kaepernick was doing. He wasn't disrespecting the flag at all, even though people obviously, for their political purposes, wanted to interpret it that way. Here's the question. Pete Carroll for the Seattle Seahawks has said, we owe Colin Kaepernick. I believe it was Pete Carroll, the coach of the Seattle Seahawks. He said, we owe Colin Kaepernick, and others have alluded to this as an impetus to have Colin Kaepernick return to football, especially since, obviously, that's why he's been exiled from football since 2016. Where do you stand in that thinking, sir?
Well, I think there's no doubt that's why Colin Kaepernick is not in the league now. He's talented enough to be in the league. This has been an issue that has hurt his career, no question about it. But I do think he's looked at differently now in light of what happened. We saw the same thing happen, and you guys are old enough to remember Muhammad Ali. And Muhammad Ali, at the beginning of his statements about not going into the service, he was looked at one way, and at the end, it was totally different because people's opinions changed based on having a little bit more knowledge of the circumstances. So I think Colin is going to be looked at much differently now going forward than he was 3 years ago. I do think he's good enough to play in the league, and I think he should be in the league.
So you brought up Muhammad Ali, Coach. I've been making that comparison. Interestingly, Ali's exile lasted about 4 years. And it wasn't simply that he was unpopular. It's that he was illegally denied his right to make a living, stripped of his titles, passport revoked, and eventually his case went to the Supreme Court where he was vindicated. But more than that, he was vindicated in the court of public opinion as the Vietnam War became unpopular. And then he was allowed to make a living again. What do you think are the chances that now that the tide has turned, I can't imagine anyone more vindicated about an issue than Colin Kaepernick. I'm kneeling because of police interactions with communities of color, and now the nation's on fire. Literally, there are curfews all around the country, and that was the flashpoint. Do you think that he will be allowed to make a living again?
Well, I don't know that, Max. And this whole thing is about changing hearts. I've said that before. This situation is not going to change in our country by legislation. It's not going to change by us throwing bricks through windows. It's not going to change by our government saying we'll dominate the streets again. This is going to change by hearts changing and by people saying, you know what, we need to come together on this and work together as a country. So we'll see where we go. I'm not sure. I think you're right about the change of opinion about Colin. We'll see if it helps him get back in the league.